Tonight's guest was featured on episode 384 not that long ago, and on that show he told us about a Dogman encounter he had last August. Well, since that episode aired, he had another encounter, and that's what he's come back to tell us about tonight. Caleb, welcome back.
Hey Vic, thanks for having me.
Well, thanks so much for coming back. I hate the circumstances that brought you back, but thanks nonetheless for doing it. I appreciate it.
Hey, yeah, no problem.
Caleb, for those listeners who missed episode 384, please tell them about yourself.
Well, my name's Caleb. I'm 23 years old. I work at a local grocery store. I love anything to do with the outdoors, hunting, fishing, trapping. I just took one of my vacations last week, and I planned on going turkey hunting almost every day. But as you're about to find out, I didn't quite do that every day. So that's pretty much all I can say about myself. Good old country outdoorsman. That's about all I can say about myself.
Well, nothing wrong with that. Unfortunately, sometimes turkey hunting doesn't go as planned, but yeah, the listeners are going to hear about that. As we talked about on episode 384, locals have a unique name for a dogman that some of them have seen in the town where you live close to. For those people listening who don't know, please tell them the nickname and why they call it that.
Well, the creature they're talking about is the Butter Street Monster. And the reason they called it that is because there's a street that goes right down the middle of Germantown, Ohio. It's the town that the street's named in. A few reports have come out from there, seeing the creature from there. If I recall, there's been, 3 or 4 Dogman sightings off of Butter Street down there in Germantown.
It's kind of strange. It's a silly name, but it's pretty creepy at the same time.
Yeah, the southern tip of Butter Street butts up against the old gravel pit. Yeah, it's got, if I had to guess, a 30, 40 acre woodlot next to it, which the Twin Creek also goes through. So it's a perfect spot for one to be, really.
Oh, no doubt from the way you describe it. And also, too, all around Germantown, you've got tons of wood, so what more could a dogman ask for?
Yeah, with the metro parks combined, they've got 2 metro parks, Twin Creek and Germantown. And then on the north end, just northwest of the metro park, they've got something they call Twin Creek Conservancy, which is pretty much just like a nature preserve. There's no trails that go through it. But if you combine them all together, it probably adds up to about 3,000 plus. That's just from the parks alone, not counting all the little wood lots and the little connector woods that go along the creek and the property.
Yeah, with all those woods and considering the fact that game in those woods can't be hunted, yeah, that's a perfect habitat for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Before your second encounter happened, how easy or difficult of a time were you having coming to terms with that first one?
The first one I had seen, I'd seen it so far away. It didn't really affect me that much. It more or less startled me. Even when I was hunting throughout last season, this past fall 2021 season, I never really was freaking out, like looking over every corner, like, oh, there's one across the corner. I never really was like that. But with this second one, I've definitely gotten a little more wary going out in the woods.
Well, I can understand why you would. Having one encounter is one thing, but when you have a repeat, that kind of drives home the point that you could have an encounter at any time. For the listeners who missed episode 384 and never heard the particulars about that first encounter you had, please tell them about it now.
Well, the build up to the story is my step-grandfather, his father had recently passed away a few months prior, and they had been having a lot of problems with the emerald ash borer beetle. And along their driveway is where their power line's at, and a lot of their trees are falling because they're dead and just decaying. So I helped him out quite a bit. We went about half a dozen times last year. And we were cutting down the trees along power lines. Because I did that, my step-great-grandmother, allowed me to hunt down there. So I've hunted down there quite a few times for quite a few years before we started cutting the wood, because I got married to my grandmother over 15 years ago. So it's been a long time. I've known him for a long time. But anyway, down there at the farm, it's really close to Farmersville, Ohio, which is maybe 5 minutes north of Germantown, maybe even less than that. The terrain around the property is real flat, typical Ohio, Western Ohio farmland, sparse woodlots with some drainage ditches. The property that these encounters took place at, they have a creek that goes through them. It's called the Little Twin Creek. It's kind of a glorified drainage creek for farm runoff, which eventually does go into the actual Twin Creek down in Germantown, Ohio. The particular year I went, it was a soybean field. This past fall, it was planted with soybeans. Some of the game you find around there, white-tailed deer. There's turkeys now, squirrel, doves, plenty of coyotes, plenty of foxes. They purchased the property back in the 70s. Sorry, not in the 70s, in the 50s, which then my grandfather my step-grandfather was born soon after that. They've owned the house ever since, but currently at the property, it's just my step-great-grandmother at the moment. It was in August, I believe, when my first sighting was. We had already been out there a few times that year. We were planning on cutting down the biggest tree on the property it was dead. It was a real big one to it. We would have had to have gotten some ladders, even some of the real big ones. My step-grandfather's brother-in-law works for the fire department down there. So he even got one of his fire trucks one time and helped us out. He'd raise us up there and we cut part of the big tree out, but we were finishing it the day of my sighting. We got out there real early. It was a little before sunrise. My step-grandfather, he likes to get stuff done early. He's an early riser anyway. We get out there a little before sunrise. He goes inside, talks to his mother. I sit out in the truck. I sit in the bed of the truck. I've done this a few times. Anybody that hunts, you glass over the soybeans, especially in the summertime. The deer like to graze on the stems in the summertime. So I'd bring my binoculars out whenever we go out there around sunrise or sunset, just to see what was going on, just see how many deer were moving through, what the bucks were looking like at the time, the antler growth. This one particular day in August, I'm sitting in the back of the truck. It's just barely sunrise. Sun just rose. I remember it was hot. I think it was already in the high 70s when we got there. It was pretty warm, muggy. And I'm glassing the field. I'm not really seeing anything. And I see something along the fence row. The fence row is an old fence post. It's kind of decaying, wearing down. It's getting honeysuckle and a bunch of different invasive bushes along the edge. But anyway, I see something, kind of trotting along the way. I raise my binoculars, my rangefinder up. At first, I think it's a coyote. It's a little silvery looking, walking on all fours. I whistle at it, as you do, and I usually whistle at a coyote. It, perks his head up, ears go straight up. When I whistled at this thing, it didn't turn at me like I thought a coyote would. It stood on its back legs, twisted its hip, and looked dead at me, went back down on all fours and started limping away, like fastly limping as it trotted on its back right leg. It continued down the fence row into the connecting woodlot, where that little twin creek goes through. So I go inside. I'm not panicking. I don't want to freak out my step-great-grandmother. She's in her 90s, late 80s. I don't want to freak her out. I was telling my step-grandfather about it. He thinks I'm crazy. He's one of those people, he never believes anything. If you tell him you see a deer, oh, it was a 10-point buck. Oh, yeah, right. You saw a spike or something like that, or a big doe. But I tell him about it, and he just tells me, it's probably just a coyote. Probably didn't stand up. It probably jumped up. But I know for sure it stood straight up and turned its hips and looked at me. But he doesn't believe me, so we continue on. And at that point, it doesn't really affect me that well or that much, because the trees we were cutting down, we were only cutting the ones along the power line, which was in front of the house on the driveway. We weren't really, and it's a long driveway too. It's about a half-mile driveway. It's a pretty long one. But we weren't worried about the ones in the trees or in the wood lot. We were just going to let it fall. Those ash trees fall. It wasn't that big of a deal. Like I said, I was probably about 250 yards away from that fence row. The fence row was out there, kind of almost on the edge of the property. I told him about it, and I asked him, I said, well, did you ever hear about, Butter Street Monster or Germantown werewolf, anything like that? He said a few of his buddies, had seen it when they were in high school, but he thought they were just yanking their chain. But that was about the end of it. I never went back there over the fall or the winter, not because I was afraid. I didn't have that much time. I got in a new position at work, and it was mostly evenings. At that time, it was mostly evenings, but then around November, when hunting season really started kicking off, I switched to working mostly mornings, 5 to 1s or 6 to 2s. So I never really had time, or the days I had off, I just kind of wanted to rest or do other things. Until this second sighting occurred, I haven't gone out there in months. It'd been since August since I'd been out there.
Yeah, I can understand why you didn't go back. All right, Caleb, now that you brought those listeners up to speed who missed episode 384, please tell us about your latest encounter now. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
On my job at the grocery store, I had a vacation week. I always take one of my vacations the last week of April. That's usually when turkey season starts. This year, it started on a weekend. It was one of OD&R's pushes to make opening weekend on a Saturday. It's usually always on a Monday. But people were complaining, they weren't getting enough birds. So they said, well, open it up on the weekend. And most people are off on the weekends. However, I wasn't. My vacation didn't start until Monday. So I missed opening day, opening season down there near Farmersville at that property. I wanted to go to my step great grandmother. I go there. I don't go Saturday. I don't go Sunday. My vacation starts Monday. I worked real late Sunday night, so I didn't get to roost any birds. If anybody knows what roosting is, I'll explain it. You go out right before sunset. Turkeys roost in trees. So you want to start, you can use like an owl call or even a hen call, a coyote call. It doesn't really matter. They'll gobble at anything this time of year. And right when that sun drops about sunset, you wait about 5 minutes, use your call, you'll hear him gobble. And 9 times out of 10, he's in a tree, and that'll be the tree he sleeps in all night. So you're kind of pinpointing their spot before you get there the next morning. So I do that Sunday. I hear a gobbler. I just call right in front of the house, right on the back porch. I hear a gobbler a little ways into the woodlot, probably on the far side of the property, maybe even on the neighbor's property, but I planned on calling him in, so I wasn't too worried about that. And I go to bed Monday night, wake up real early Tuesday morning. I like to be sitting out in my spot at a minimum of a half hour before shooting light, which shooting light is a half hour before sunrise. So really, I like to be sitting down an hour before shooting hour. I get up to the field, I don't need a flashlight. It's pretty bright. It was pretty bright out that night or that morning. I'm walking out there. I put my decoys up. I got 2 decoys, a Jake, which is a juvenile male turkey, and a hen decoy. I put those out 30 yards in front of me at the edge of this wood line. And I sit there, I'm sitting there. Shooting time comes, which at that time, I think it was like 6:14 a.m. It goes up and down a minute. I think it was 6:14 a.m. I hear him gobble. He wakes up. So I'm sitting there a little bit longer. I hear him. He keeps gobbling as he wakes up. The more he wakes up, the more and more he gobbles. And it's a little bit before sunrise. I do a few yelps. He gobbles one last time. And I'm like, all right, he's going to come down to me. He's going to fly down the tree. And we're going to get us a bird this morning. Right after sunrise, he never did gobble again. I'm thinking that's strange, but it's not unheard of. If a turkey has a hen with him already in the tree that he was sleeping in, he's not going to waste his time to leave his hen to go find another hen that's 200 yards away. He's just not going to do that. So I didn't think anything of it. About 7:30 comes around. The sun's been up for about 45 minutes now. I still don't hear anything. I'm man, what's going on? And to the right of me, right on the edge, I start hearing something walking. It's walking through the woods. I can't really tell. It's 2-legged, 4-legged. I can't really tell. It's about 80 yards away, but I do hear something walking through ever so slightly because it was kind of quiet that morning. The wind wasn't really blowing. So I figured it's a tom. It's either a tom or it's a Jake, or it could be even just a hen, and it's coming out and it's coming toward the decoys. Well, right when it gets toward the edge of the woodlot in the field, I throw my gun up, and I'm locking eyes toward the decoys. And when you turkey hunt, you don't want to move at all. They're not like deer. Deer, they can use all their senses pretty well. They've got great hearing, they've got great eyesight, and they've got great smell. Turkey really pretty much just have all right hearing. Turkey, they're birds. They've just got really holes in their heads. They don't really have like mammal ears that they can twist and turn. And they can't really smell at all, but their eyesight is what really picks them out. They can see a really far distance away. So I'm standing there still. I don't want to move at all. I don't even move my eyes. I don't move my head or anything. I'm afraid it's a turkey. If I move my head, it's going to come out. And it's just pausing there. And I'm like, well, that's weird. If it's not a turkey, turkeys usually, they like to be out in the field, looking for bugs and stuff. So I'm thinking, well, maybe it's a raccoon or a coyote. Maybe it sees my decoys, and it's coming out. I've done that. I've been hunting before, and I've had raccoons come right up to my decoys, and they'll start scratching them and biting them. I figured at that point it wasn't a turkey. It was some kind of predator looking at my decoys thinking they're real. Until it finally comes out. It finally comes, like, mind you, I'm like 70, 80 yards away from it still. So I'm a little far, not crazy close, but not crazy far. And I can see it moving on all 4 legs. And this thing is pretty big. It's pretty big. I immediately thought about the creature I saw back in August. I didn't think coyote. I thought, man, is this the same? It was the same color, same everything. And I slowly start moving my head and my eyes, and I'm looking at it. I don't move my body. I don't move my arms or torso, just my head and my eyes. And I'm looking at it, and it's creeping toward my decoys, still with that right back leg limping. I'm like, man, it is the same thing. And it gets about the halfway point. It stands up on its back legs, almost like to get a better view of my decoys. And, it's turning its head. I see its ears moving. I think it eventually finds out my decoys aren't real. They're not the most convincing in the world. Like a human could kind of tell. Mine, at least, they weren't the best quality because I lost my better ones last year. I think somebody stole them. I was hunting on public land. Somebody stole them. So I had some cheaper ones this year. And you could kind of tell they weren't the best quality. But once I found out they were fake, it turned around, it slopped back on all fours, and it's limping away on that back leg, creeps back into the wood lot, and I can hear it going deeper into the woods. I just sit there. I'm in disbelief. I throw my gun down on my lap. I'm looking around, of course, I'm looking to my left. I'm looking up, down, right, center, everywhere I could. And I just sat there for about a half hour. It was about 8 o'clock. I finally got up, grabbed my decoys, and I fast walked down. I didn't want to run. I fast walked down to there. I threw my stuff in the car, threw my decoys, my gun. I don't even think I unloaded my gun. I was that upset. I didn't realize until I got home. Man, I had this thing loaded in my car. I'm glad it didn't go off. But I didn't say hi to my step great grandmother or anything. I just dropped everything and left. And I haven't been back there since. For the longest time, I wasn't turning my head. I didn't want to look at it, but it had like grayish hair, not quite like white hair like you'd see on like an like a elderly person. It was gray. It was silver. It was missing hair and spine. It almost looked a little mangy. Some of its skin was, the gray, leathery, kind of like what a canine would look like with mange. Couldn't really see his eyes. Like I said, I was about 70 yards away. I could see some of his ears moving, like an animal, like a mammal would move his ears, try to hear things. I couldn't really see his paws or his back legs. Its tail, I noticed, was missing some hair. Kind of looked like a dog with flea's tail. And it trotted, limping on that back leg. I don't know why. That could be why it wasn't walking on its hind legs and that back leg still. I couldn't really see if it was broken. I was too far away. Like I said, 70 yards away. But I haven't been back out there since. I planned on going about every morning, but I only went out that Tuesday and I still haven't been out yet. I don't know if I need to convince myself, that it wasn't going to do me any harm. It was going after the turkeys, not me. If you're a predator, a human's not a big threat at all. We don't really have a lot other than my shotgun, but then even then it was loaded with birdshot, for turkeys. I'm sure it would hurt. Would it kill it? No, it'd probably just piss it off more. I don't know if I need to try to convince myself that humans aren't on the menu or this thing was just desperate and looking for food. And that's why it was coming out in broad daylight in the middle of a field going after some clearly to humans, plastic turkey decoys, but I don't know to it, but it's affected me pretty good. I don't know if I'm going to go out anymore this season.
Well, if you don't, I can understand why, but I hope you come to terms with this and sooner rather than later, you're able to go back into the woods or head out into the field and do all those things you love to do at one time.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Yeah, well, time will tell. Did you ever go and look in the area where you heard that turkey's last gobble to try and find evidence of what happened to him?
No, I'm pretty sure he was on a neighbor's property, like right barely over it, because the creek, divides the woodlot. One side's the neighbor, the other side's my step great grandmother. I've never met the neighbor. I didn't want to go over there. I didn't want to go over there and try to cross the creek. I didn't know if he was hunting that day. I wasn't sure. I didn't go over there to see where he was or what was happening with him.
Yeah, I don't blame you there if you didn't know the neighbor, and especially if you didn't have permission. Yeah, a good move about not going over that way. Before or after you had that most recent encounter, did you ever notice an appreciable change in the population of turkeys in that area?
No, not really. I trap quite a bit down there too when I can. Raccoons and possums are really what you want to go after because they'll eat eggs, possums especially. They're real popular egg thieves. The hen, she'll try to defend her nest as good as she can, but against a big raccoon or a big possum, there ain't much she can do. She'll walk up, fly away, and that possum or raccoon will eat the whole nest. Turkey population won't do any good if you can't get them to hatch. But no, I trap pretty heavily down there. Not this past year, like I said, but in years prior, I've gotten about 10 to 20 on average raccoons and possums just to try to help the bird population up. The coyotes, they come and go. They're not my step great grandmother. She doesn't really ever see them regularly. The turkey's been pretty stable down there. I know I said on the last episode that she's had a few dogs and cats missing. Other than that, no, the game population seems to be doing all right down there.
Well, from listening to you share that experience, it sounds like he's got a taste for turkeys, so I wouldn't have been surprised if he had put a dent in their population.
Yeah.
When it stood up on its back legs, how tall would you say it was?
I'd say it was just a little taller than me, maybe 6, 7 feet tall. It wasn't crazy big.
It didn't sound like he was in all that good a shape, but what kind of impression did you get about his age?
I couldn't really tell. I mean, the grayish fur kind of implied that he was a little older, maybe. The malnourishment. He was kind of skinny. His skin was real leathery. So I could kind of assume that, maybe he was old and he just couldn't really quite hunt as well as he used to be able to. Or she, I guess I couldn't really tell at that distance. I could only assume it was old or older, or at the very least struggling to catch anything because of its injury.
Well, I can understand when you mention the color of its fur and the condition of its fur, you thinking it was an older one, but 6 feet tall, 7 feet tall, that's not very big at all for a dog man, so that makes me think it must have been the younger one that was pretty bad off.
Yeah.
When it was up on his back legs, what was it doing with his arms?
With its arms, it was kind of just like, it was kind of swaying them like back and forth to balance itself out, maybe because of his right, because he couldn't put a lot of pressure on his right leg. So his arms were kind of not like a T. They were out a little bit. I guess I'm what I'm trying to say. They weren't like close to his side, or or they weren't directly, straight down like a human would stand. They were a little to the side. I can only assume he was kind of maybe trying to balance, maybe.
I see. The moment you saw that it was having trouble with that leg, did you instantly think, aha, that's the same Dogman I saw last time around?
Yeah. Like I said, he was the same color as the last one I seen, but right when he stood up, I was like, yeah, that's him. That's the same one. He's still hanging around.
Yeah, sure sounds like it. Even though he never looked at you directly, how sure are you, or aren't you, that he didn't know you were there?
I had gotten me a little, it was marked down from this past fall and winter, one of those ghillie suits, the leaved up stuff. I painted my face, my forehead, all that. I had a big camo hat on. My shotgun was in camo pattern. Boots were camo pattern. I wasn't directly sitting like off to the field. I was in the brush a little bit, to try to conceal myself from the birds. But it never turned his head toward me. I was trying to stay as quiet as I could. I don't know if he heard me and just tried to ignore me, didn't look my way. I don't know if it knew I was there or not, but it never implied that it knew I was there. It never looked at me. I don't know if he was sniffing the air. He might have smelled me because I didn't have any scent killer on. You don't really need that for turkey. I don't believe he knew I was there. He could have, but there wasn't a lot of wind either that morning, so maybe he probably couldn't smell me. I don't know.
Well, even though you're so decked out with the camo and everything, when you consider how sharp their senses are, I'd be astonished if he didn't know that you were actually there that day. But it's possible maybe he didn't know. Did the fact it was so bright out make you less or more anxious, considering the fact that light obviously made it easier for you to see, but it also made it easier for you to be seen?
Well, I was more or less puzzled. Like the last time I saw it, it was right at sunrise. A lot of animals move at sunrise and sunset. And, I saw it moving up the fence row right at sunset or sunrise, I mean. So I was assuming it was moving from one wood lot to the other, but to see it, it wasn't broad daylight. The sun had been up for almost an hour. And it was just kind of weird to see it out in the day. I thought, wow, this thing must be desperate. I did see it, I would see it in more detail than I would have at night. At night you see it, it probably just looks like a big black blob, or in this case, a silver blob. It was just kind of puzzling to see a predator out, well past the sunrise in the middle of a field at that. It wasn't like it was in the forest. It was cut bean field.
Well, as you know, he's not afraid of anything, so he might be giving himself away to the prey that he's going after, but yeah, it's not that surprising that he wasn't hiding.
Her property isn't very far at all from the actual town of Farmersville. If you want to call it a town, it's like a really small village. Most people live in Germantown. Germantown's an actual town. But Farmersville is just kind of like a little, technically a village, but not a lot of people live there. But there are some residential houses there. I don't know if maybe he's just used to people, and because her house, if you look at it from Google Maps, it's less than 1.5 miles from the center of town,
Yeah, that is pretty close. It sounded like you answered this a bit ago, but just to clarify, has this latest encounter been easier or more difficult for you to deal with than the first one?
It's been a little more difficult. Like I said, I haven't been out hunting since then. Like I said, I planned on going every single night. I tried going Thursday night to try to roost some birds at a piece of public land down here, Caesars Creek Wildlife Area, but I couldn't even get out. I didn't want to get out of my car. It was right at sunset. I'd have to walk in like a mile or about a half mile. I just didn't want to do it. I was still a little freaked out. So I went back, went fishing a few times with my brother at a local spillway. The spillway, it's just mowed grass. That wasn't really that difficult. But hunting, I'm starting to get a little worried. Deer season coming up in the end of September. Now's the time of year you're going to start putting out mineral blocks and trail cameras so the bucks can grow their antlers, and just so you can get a general consensus how many deer's on your property. And I don't know if I want to do that, because I still got to go. And my grandparents' neighbors, I still got to go in there like about a mile, put up my camera with my bait and everything. Even if I do it in broad daylight, that doesn't really help me because I saw this thing in the daylight. So, I don't really know. Hopefully it'll get better in the next coming weeks.
I hope it does too. At least you're heading back out and doing things out in the outdoors. Maybe not the way you used to, but it's a start. At least you are doing some things. So that's great. On 2 occasions, you've seen dogmen now. Some eyewitnesses are convinced they're ethereal beings, but what are your thoughts on that?
I don't think it's that. I think it's got to be flesh and blood, a natural creature. And I don't think a spirit would be trying to attack turkeys or a turkey decoy. What they are, I have no idea where they evolved from. I don't know if they're man-made experiments gone wrong or curses put on people. I have no idea as of that. But I do think they're flesh and blood. I don't think they're spiritual.
You make some really good points. Yeah, there are so many people who are convinced that dogmen have to be ethereal, but like you said, if they're ethereal beings, then why would they want to hunt turkeys? There was a question a listener left in response to episode 384 that piqued your interest. Please expand on that for us.
My step-great-grandfather, he used to trap and hunt a lot down there. Back then, they had a lot more prairie, fence rows. That's just the way of the farming techniques back then before the big industrial plows. Less woods, but he liked to hunt and trap. He used to trap coyotes a lot. Coyotes, they're starting to move in the air. They're starting to become a big problem. They were eating chickens, people's rabbits, and the wild bird populations of quail and pheasant. So he trapped quite a bit along the fence rows. And this same fence row, that I saw that first sighting in August, my step-great-grandfather said he put out a bunch of big traps, big coyote traps. I was thinking about trapping, you don't want to make it too big, because if you make it too big, you crush the whole arm, or sometimes the animal, it'll just miss them. But if you make them too small, sometimes the animals slip right out of them. I guess my step-great-grandfather, he used to use real big coyote traps, for the real big ones. He put a few out, along the fence row, and one of them came up missing. He'd bait them with either coyote urine or even like chicken heads he would use, or beef guts, whatever they would from the farm. This one time he used coyote urine. It was the mating season. He poured it out and left. The next day he came back and it was gone. That was pretty shocking to him because he uses real big rebar stakes, to stake them into the ground. And, usually a coyote has no problem. It'll get stuck and will stay in there. He was trying to think what it was. He thought maybe it was a deer, but deer, they don't get really caught in foothold traps that often. Their reflexes are too quick. They hear that click. They jump up real quick. And a deer's legs are real bony too. They don't really have paws. They got hooves. So even if they get caught, they just slip it right out. If somebody's cow got loose and was walking through it, they thought, well, certainly, a neighbor would be like, hey, I got your trap. ODNR, they require you to put your name, your customer service ID number, address, that kind of stuff on each of your traps. And he just never really thought anything of it. It's something that could get stuck and, pull the whole thing out of the ground. My step-grandfather, I think he said he was in his 20s that time. So that'd have to put that somewhere around the early 80s, late 70s is when that event occurred. And one of the last listeners, he brought up a point. He said, he asked the question, he said, what if the creature I saw was the one that got his foot stuck, in the trap and it got pulled down, and then, maybe he just couldn't get the trap off, maybe with the dogman's hands, or he just couldn't figure out how to pry it open, because you can't just pry it open. There's a certain thing you got to do with these certain foothold traps. You got to push the edges down and then you can pry them open. Maybe the dogman didn't know that. Maybe it rotted his foot away. Like I said, I couldn't really see his foot. I couldn't really see what was on the end of it. It really has made me think, I was like, well, how long can these things live for? If that took place back in the, we'll say early 80s, late 70s, that'd be about 40 years. I know some chimps can live up in their 50s and 60s. Great apes can live in their 40s. It made me really think. I was like, man, maybe this is the same one, especially since I saw it on the same fence row that he lost that trap at. But I don't know. It just made me think how long these things can live for.
Yeah, it does make you wonder, and it sure does sound like it must be the same one when you think about all the things involved. And I'll tell you this, if that is what happened to that dog man and why it's wounded, I would not want to be out there putting traps out and be seen by that dog man doing that. I don't think he'd respond to that very well.
Yeah. And when you brought up earlier about how short it was and it might not be young, I was just thinking about it. Maybe it got his foot caught when he was young, and it kind of stunted his growth. Maybe he wasn't able to get the proper nutrient. I don't know how long he's been malnourished for. I don't know if he's been struggling his whole life and maybe just hasn't quite been able to, or maybe walking on all of his fours his whole life, has made him to not be as straight and tall. Maybe his back is like hunched in. Maybe he's developed like a hump, kind of like a grizzly bear or a black bear has. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a good point. That just might be what was behind his smaller size. You never know. Recently asked your step-great-grandmother if anything strange had happened on her property since last August. What did she say about that?
Like I said, she's older. She doesn't really leave the house very often. She'll get her hair done, about once a week in Germantown. She'll go to the local IGA. But other than that, she kind of just stays inside all day. Never has the windows open yet. She's older, so it's kind of cold. She said nothing's really happened. None of her cats have been taken. As for her neighbors, I'm not sure. Like I said, I'm not too friendly with their neighbors. So I'm not sure what their situations are. Well, he hasn't lost any cats. She hasn't gotten a new dog since she lost the last one. As far as I know, all of her cats are present and accounted for.
Well, good. I'm glad it's leaving her animals alone. Well, it's about time for us to get out of here, Caleb, but before we do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Yeah, a few weeks ago, I've been watching some older episodes, and I was listening to the episode with Jody Cook, where he was talking about Germantown and stuff. He was saying something about ODNR. They had some code words for creatures, like Bigfoot was brown cow, I believe. Dogman was black dog. Well, I didn't think about it until after I was re-listening to the episode. I did a ride-along with the Metro Park Rangers down there, right out of high school. That's what I wanted to do for the longest time. I wanted to be a law enforcement. I went to school for that down in Athens County, natural resource law enforcement. So I did a ride-along with one of them one day. The route he was taking was to patrol the southern part, the southwest part of the Montgomery County. We went through Twin Creek, Germantown Metro Park. As we were driving through Germantown Metro Park, at the time I wasn't listening to your podcast. I was listening to Bigfoot, but I wasn't. That was like the only cryptid I was into. I didn't really dwell too deep into the rest of them. We were driving through Germantown. I asked him. I said, have you ever gotten any weird calls down here? I was like, what's the weirdest, some of those strangest calls you've gotten in from the dispatch center? And at the time, I was hoping he was alluding toward, somebody saw Bigfoot. He told me a few things. He told me somebody's seen in Germantown. He said he's seen through the park. They've gotten multiple calls on a woman in a white dress. And then he told me black dogs running around the park. And at the time, I was like, oh, that's weird. Those stray dogs. And then I listened to Jody Cook's video or his episode on your podcast. He said, ODNR's got codes. He said Dogman or black dogs. And that just made me think. I was like, man, is he just telling me that people's called in Dogman sightings down here? And it was, black dogs. That just occurred to me a few weeks ago.
Yeah, just imagine how common of an occurrence it has to be for them to have code for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it must happen all the time. Well, Caleb, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing the details of that most recent experience with us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem, Vic.
Thanks again so much. Have a great night.